Hi guys, so now that we know the dragon setup for black and we're ready to play it against any e4 opening, basically putting the pawns at c5, d6 and a pawn on g6, getting our bishop dragon out, the question is how would it really look like in a game? So that's what this game is meant to show you, and we're gonna take a look at Anand, who was a former world champion, playing against another former world champion by the name of Mr. Kasparov. So Gary Kasparov in this game decided to go for the dragon setup and completely destroyed White's attack and then really demolished the White king side. So let's take a look at how that looks like so we can use those attacking ideas in our game. So we start off with king's pawn opening and Gary says, can I take a little bite off your center? White says, only if I can take a little bite back next move. And so black puts the pawn on d6 so as to get the knight to f6 and get the dragon bishop out. Some people first take out the dragon bishop with g6 and bishop g7, but the problem there is that white can play both d4 and c4 and get such a big chunk of the center and control everything and make sure we can never get both d5 and b5, which are moves that we really like to get in this opening. So let's take a look at how the normal dragon looks like with a pawn on d6. So this is the classical dragon, okay? White says, can I open things up and play the open Sicilian? Black trades up the central pawn for his own flank pawn, and white gets a nice knight in the middle. We attack his pawn, white defends his pawn and says, no thank you. Black says, can I get my dragon bishop out, please? And white says, let's start castling queenside so I can pawn storm you better. And black says, I really don't mind, because even if you do pawn storm me, I can pawn storm you, and I can use that open c file. Let's see how that looks like. The queen starts to make a battery, getting ready to trade off the dragon bishop, and black says, no, because if you decide to trade off right now with bishop h6, then I will take, queen takes back, and say bye to your knight. And that's why this knight is so good on c6. White says, I want to make sure that you can't go to knight g4, so I'm gonna put a pawn there and defend my own center. Black says, what if I castle and get ready to be pawn stormed on the queen side? And white takes out the bishop, making sure that the center doesn't open with d5, because it's not very pretty for white when those bishops open up and start firing on those long diagonals. Black modestly takes out the bishop to make way for the rook, and white says time to pawn storm, time to attack as soon as possible before I even castle. And this game it proved to be a little mistake. By itself it's not that bad because you can always castle next move, but most people they castle first, and we'll see why in a second. For example, white never got to castle. And of course black says, no, you can't cross the equator, no, I'm not letting you soften up my roof and use that hook on g6 to open up your rook, no, I'm not gonna let you do that, because I'm stubborn. And the bishop runs away, and this is like a prophylactic move, knowing that later on this bishop doesn't feel very safe there or very comfy, because the knight's coming in, the rook's coming in, and somebody's gonna hurt that bishop, so we just move him back where he's a bit safer. Now, some people would just get the bishop pair with knight a5 and trade off the bishop, but Mr. Kasparov had other plans in this game. So he brings up all his reinforcements, brings in the rook on the c file, and black takes because black wants, white takes because white wants black to trade off with the bishop and then close up his own roof, and so that he can trade off that annoying bishop and live happily ever after. But Gary takes with his pawn and says, I don't care that my rook is on the c file, I'll change it to the b file. Feel free to take this pawn on a7 and get your bishop trapped with c5. I'm all for that, you know, feel free to take that pawn. And even if you don't take that pawn, now I control the d5 square, which is usually really annoying for black, considering that the knight goes there, and even if the black knight takes, then white pawn takes, and the e7 pawn becomes soft and a backwards pawn, and it becomes hard to defend. So we like to have control over the d5 square, so that this knight doesn't have any dreams in the future. And right away, white tries to get rid of the dragon bishop. But because he gave away the central knight and he still didn't castle yet, we can give him something to worry about. For example, how is that bishop feeling? Even if you do trade off my bishop, then the other bishop of yours is not feeling too well, because even if he goes to a4 and does run away, well then, first of all, he does nothing. Second of all, I could trade him off and put a knight on the rim, and that knight really doesn't want to be on a4, he wants to be attacking. And here there is no attack on the black king, who's completely safe as long as there is a knight protecting him, right? There is no rook to give him anything to worry about yet, because white never castled, right? So let's take a look at how things went. The bishop said, what if I just block you? And what if I put a bishop in your way so that you can't push the pawn up? Well, then the queen comes in and says, what about the b2 weakness that you let me attack by opening up the b file? And now my rook can also join the party. And then it's not so easy to defend this pawn, because even if you do castle, well, consider that my rook is coming to b8. If you play something like castle, rook to b8 and b3, look at those dark squares. And then I'm already threatening queen a3 check, and I'm also threatening something like bishop takes and say bye to your knight. Perhaps we'll even take your bishop first, something like this, and then start invading. You see, so that's no fun for white, which is why Mr. Anand decided against castling long. And he said, maybe I'll keep my king in the middle just a bit longer, but that was all the time Gary needed to checkmate. So let's take a look at the final attack. Bishop c4 and queen to b6. How are you defending that pawn? And white said, first of all, I'll trade off that bishop of yours so you don't decoy my queen anywhere. And then after that, I'll just defend normally and make sure my bishop's reinforced, make sure that my king is not gonna get under attack, because he can always castle kingside and maybe hide on h1. Well, black said, what if I trade out that bishop of yours? And what if I still play c4 when the bishop is gone? And what if I open up the c file again? And if you do trade, then look at my f file, because maybe I can use that in the future with the idea of d5 coming in as well. So Anand was so scared, he said, maybe I should put a knight there instead, and maybe I should just centralize, right? But now Gary takes with the bishop and leaves white with a very hard choice, because you take with the bishop, this pawn's coming here, forget about castling kingside. And if you take with the pawn, which is what Vichy did in the game, well then, what is that guy doing here? What's the bishop on c4 doing? Staring at two walls of his own color? And look at my excellent knight, who's attacking that basically isolated pawn. And look at your king, where is he casting? Is he gonna castle short? Well then, how is his rook doing? How are his dark squares doing? Not really well. And if you do take, which is what white basically has to do, well then our king is castled and your king is not, which means time to blow up the center, which is exactly what Gary does. Blows up the center, asks the bishop some questions like, if you take me, now first we'd probably play something like rook to d8, ask your bishop another question, and then ask him and the last question that he'll have to look at, because now there is no way to save the bishop. And so these central files are just too strong for black, right? And the bishop doesn't want to take, which means he has to go back home, and he doesn't like going back home because that gives black all this space. And should we take this pawn back? Not really, because we have to make sure the king doesn't castle first, and they're getting ready to implant that nail into his house, that annoying nail, just hammer it in there. And white says, I really don't like that nail. I want to make sure that nail stays exactly where it is on c4 and so I can take it later on. Because if white does take, you could say, what happens then? Well, now dark squares with queen to b2, but also you're not castling either way. And probably something like d takes c and rook to d8 looks really scary. If you push, that's totally fine. Now just get the e-file instead, looking at your king and bishop. So let's see how the game ended. Basically, white said, don't put your nail in there, and black said, what if I ask your bishop some questions? And would you like to take my pawn to double up and help me double up my rooks and make a battery? Well, white took, black took back, and now here is the battery anyways. It's coming no matter what. The king is running for his life because he doesn't like the rook looking at him. And here is the battery. Everything's in the right places. Not like these guys who are nowhere to be seen. You see, white forgot to castle and white forgot to attack because he never got the time. And now he'll get punished for it. Because the bishop tries to run away. Well then, we'll just get rid of their bishop. And then this beautiful below at the end, knight to e4, threatening knight g3 fork, threatening queen f2 if the queen goes away, and then saying, feel free to take my knight. It's a gift from the bottom of my heart, because if you decide to take, you can't go there, you'll have to run to e2 where I can skewer your king and queen, or maybe you'd like to run to e1 where my rooks will just dominate. I have 2 rooks, you have 2 bystanders, right? So that are doing nothing. And if the king decides to run away, I'll take the bishop and just be dominating there. Or if the bishop decides to run away, well, that's gonna be the last time he ever moves, because next move I'll take him off the board, probably winning the queen with him. So it's complete domination from black's perspective in this dragon variation. So hopefully you guys can play the dragon just like Kasparov. You see, he liked the bishop, but he allowed the dragon bishop to be traded off so that he can attack the white king who never got to castle in this game. And all the other pieces were so good. He put a lot of pressure on the c-file, he put a lot of pressure on the bishop, who was unsure where to go because he just kept getting kicked back and forth from c4 to b3 to c4 to e2. And so we bullied the bishop until he's got nowhere to go, just like the white king.